Welcome back to another episode of the Done Deal Show. Joined today by the brilliant Ben Jacobs. How are you, my friend?
Really good. How are you?
I'm well. A few technical issues. We went live on the wrong stream. I sent out the wrong link. So I've had a mare of a morning so far. But aside from that, mate, I'm very good indeed. And I'm loving the jumper today. A nice, bright, I wouldn't say summery jumper, because you don't wear some jumpers in summer, but nice and bright as the weather started to turn. I like it, Ben. That's a good one, that jumper today.
Yeah, this is another Zara concoction out of the closet. So very welcome in the chat to score it out of 10 or maybe 100. I think it's a solid 8. I just don't know if it's 8 out of 10 or 8 out of 100.
Yeah, listen, it's a very nice one. Viewers, let us know what you think of the jumper. Lots to delve into today with Man United's takeover, the pursuit of Harry Kane and a striker for Man United. We're going to take a look at Arsenal and the link to Caicedo and Rice. What is going on there? Ben's going to give us some really good insight. We're going to look at Chelsea with the likes of Mason Mount still not agreeing a new deal, and Liverpool circling in that space as well. Plus some looks at Sane, Mane and Raphinha deals as well. Any question, viewers, please send in your comments now. We'll, of course, prioritize member chats and our super chats at the same time. But I think there's no better place to start, really, Ben, to be honest with you, than the situation with Manchester United and the takeover, because a lot of talk surrounding it, a lot of opinions surrounding it. But what is the latest as far as your understanding of the picking of the so-called preferred bidder?
Well, I think the first thing to say is, again, as of this morning, and I always try and put a time on it now because it's fluid and fast moving, neither of the groups, Sir Jim Ratcliffe or Sheikh Jassim, has had formal feedback that they're either a preferred bidder or out of the race. And as I've said many times, when you get to this stage in a takeover, there's always a possibility that the process becomes less important, and actually direct engagement with the Glazers, of course, with Rain's blessing, is in essence key. So there's quite a bit going on behind the scenes. And right from the very start of the Manchester United takeover, the S in Glazers was important, because if 6 want to go, then Sheikh Jassim has confidence. If 4 want to stay, and if 4 want to leave, I should say, and 2 want to remain, in Joel and Avram, then Sheikh Jassim is no longer interested. And then you only have Sir Jim Ratcliffe left and any strategic partners, or a no sellers possibility as well. So after the April 28th deadline, it's no real surprise that things appear to have gone quiet, but behind the scenes, that's not necessarily the case. And we've heard in the last 24, 48 hours, suggestions from the Manchester United or selling side that perhaps Sir Jim Ratcliffe is the favourite. And that may be an indication that Joel and Avram want to stay. But again, to reiterate, the groups are in the dark, at least as of this morning. We'll wait and see whether that changes by Friday evening or early next week. But they have not had anything communicated to them. And there was some surprise within the Ratcliffe camp when they were seemingly named as the preferred bidder, or that was the whispers. They had no indication that that was the direction of travel. And again, from the Sheikh Jassim side, there's been bemusement over the course of the last week or so about suggestions, even though they come from credible sources, that their offer on the table is subpar, effectively. So I would urge caution with this, because there's a lot of games taking place at the moment. And part of that is down to the fact that competitive tension is needed to get the highest possible price. And my sense in all of this is that nobody's hit the Glazers' valuation. That doesn't mean the Glazers aren't going to accept a deal, but no one's hit their ideal number. And I've said many times, that ideal number is not, to my understanding, £6 billion. It's $7 billion. And I use dollars because this whole transaction is in dollars. The offer's placed it in dollars. So we need to remember that and think of this as a US transaction. It's a public listed company on the New York Stock Exchange. And $7 billion, obviously, when you convert it to pounds, will oscillate a little bit, but it's more like 5.6 billion in the current market. So it is a little bit less, and that will be an acceptable number. And to be honest with you, both Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Sheikh Jassim are not so far off that a deal is not possible. So it's going to come down to one thing again. And it sounds ridiculous, because how many twists and turns have we had? How complex has this whole thing been? It's going to come back to the same question we asked 6 months ago. Do the Glazers want to go in their entirety, or do 2 of them want to stay? And if 2 of them want to stay, they've only got one credible option in Sir Jim Ratcliffe. And if 6 of them want to go, then I still think that Sheikh Jassim stands a very realistic chance. So at the moment, one key thing is happening, which is why it's gone quiet. And that's there's engagement between the seller and both groups. And the reason for that is because the due diligence has basically been done. And that's a bit transactionally backwards for a takeover. And as a consequence, whatever direction the Glazers choose to move in, they'll be near ready to sign and much faster than people expect. Because again, the legwork, the due diligence has all been done earlier than in a traditional takeover. And I've reported and been told many times that there may not be the need for a period of exclusivity next, or if there is one, it will be relatively short. So what's happening now, effectively, is in the absence of anyone yet being in a period of exclusivity, the Glazers again can have their cake and eat it, and they can go to Jassim and Ratcliffe and other strategic partners or investors and say, listen, we think we're moving in this direction, but we're happy to also speak to you. And this is the approach we want to make, but we may change it if your offer goes up. So games and competitive tension and behind the scenes talks are delaying this before the Glazers show their hand. And that's why at the moment we don't have a preferred bidder. And that's why the Glazers haven't even given anything away yet directly to the groups. That may change over the course of the next 24, 48 hours. Certainly, I think by the middle of next week. But we have to be patient here. But at the time we are recording this, and I stress in case anybody is watching it,
anyone clips it
pre-record, it's 11:05 on a Friday morning. It might change at 11:06, who knows? But at the time we are live, neither group has been told or even hinted at yet in a formal or informal sense that they are the preferred bidder. And I think that is important to stress.
Yeah, listen, this is one thing that's really, obviously a lot of United fans online recently, why is it taking so long? And my view is they've just not read articles fully. I actually read something recently that shows that if you read an article, people generally, when they read an article, will read the opening paragraph. And what then happens is a lot of the time in articles now, there's then like filler in the middle of information that everybody already knows. And what people typically tend to do is they switch off reading the article because they go, oh, I know the rest of this. And they stop listening. But when you read the real in-depth articles, when you listen to people like yourself, Kieran Maguire and others, they all stated that the idea of these hard deadlines was a little bit of a fallacy. It would take as long as it takes. And the fact that people keep increasing their bids means it will drag on longer. And I think Man United fans have got, I know it's hard, remain patient, stop doing the Glazers bidding by panicking or getting overexcited at the idea of other, certain buyers, because I think what the Glazers do is they weaponize that and they throw it into different parties to just try and increase prices. So it is where it is right now. Nobody knows the full truth, as you stated earlier. The Sheikh came out only a couple of weeks ago and said he's bemused, obviously via his people, bemused at the level of money that they're saying he's bidded. That like he's, it's undisclosed. They haven't said how much is going out there, but the amounts are a lot smaller than are being suggested. So it's really interesting to see what way this goes. And as you say, it's anybody's guess as of right now. In terms of Man United and transfers, Ben, a big story this morning that Man United are fearful they will not be successful in their efforts to sign the Tottenham striker Harry Kane. What's the latest on that? We know it's a deal that's on. We know it's a deal that Man United are going to be very active in this summer. But is it dependent on new owners, or is this a player that Man United will go for as a number one target, irrespective of who owns the football club?
The new ownership doesn't affect a massive amount in the short term in terms of targets, because you're planning ahead already for the summer. And I think anyone that comes in the absence of a new football lead, if you like, will respect what the club have been building on, and obviously speak to Erik ten Hag as well. And people look at Sheikh Jassim in particular and say there'll be some kind of war chest for Erik ten Hag. But remember, Manchester United still have to abide by financial fair play and profit and sustainability. So they can't just come in and spend what they might like to immediately unless other things fall into place. And this is why Manchester United qualifying for the Champions League is the most important thing as far as the summer is concerned. Whether it's the Glazers still in charge, Ratcliffe or Jassim or somebody else, qualifying for Champions League is what's going to give the extra bit of budget. And you look at Liverpool, for example, and how they pulled out of the race for Jude Bellingham because they wanted to put the budget that they're now planning for on 3 or 4 instead of just 1. And now Liverpool are making a push for Champions League football. And if they get it, they may have a bit more leeway during the summer. So the priority is qualify for Champions League football. That impacts the summer budget. Then if a new owner comes in, of course, if it's Sheikh Jassim or Sir Jim Ratcliffe, they may want to spend a slightly different way. But these names that you're hearing with Manchester United, like Jassim and Ratcliffe, are not the day-to-day. They're going to be bringing in people. So as I revealed a couple of weeks ago, the Ineos group are looking at Paul Mitchell and have earmarked him for Nice as well. And with Sheikh Jassim, there is actually also quite a lot of respect for Mitchell, but they're still in a slightly more formative phase of recruiting a football lead if they're successful. Then they're, of course, going to give the existing Manchester United hierarchy, inclusive of the recruitment team, time and assess them. And that will come if a new group is successful after they get in. And there's usually, as we saw with Chelsea and Todd Boehly, a 100-day review. So Manchester United's window, certainly the early part, is locked because that's what you have to do. Plan ahead. You don't just come in on June the 10th and say, I want this new player, new strategy. That's not how football works. You plan 2-3 windows ahead usually. And if you're getting your business done early, it's probably because you've put something in place for that player around about now, if not a month before. So then with Kane, Manchester United have gone to the player side and are exploring the possibility of a deal. And they're doing that early to work out if they're wasting their time, because Manchester United fans will remember how difficult Daniel Levy made, for example, the signing of Dimitar Berbatov. And they also know, Manchester United, that down the road in the blue half of Manchester, when Kane was pushing a bit more for a move and Manchester City were in the mix, Levy was also dismissive and said, pay 200 million or walk away. And he made it absolutely impossible to start a negotiation. So Manchester United have to understand if they're wasting their time with Kane or there's a viable chance of actually signing him. And a lot of that will depend on Levy rather than Kane. But don't get sucked in with all of this, because nothing's changed with Harry Kane for months. There's a circus at Spurs, there's a crisis at Spurs. But as I've said many times, since about October, Tottenham's position has been clear. They want to keep Harry Kane. And the only slight shift in sentiment is they were calm about the situation because they thought it was more likely that Kane would stay than go. Then flash forwards and Tottenham are in free fall. They've had 2 interims plus Antonio Conte. They don't have a permanent manager. They don't have a sporting director. It's the biggest crisis Levy's ever faced. So, of course, the dynamics changed. And virtually every show we've ever done, I've said, Kane will wait and see how the project develops before deciding. And that's exactly the same. So in theory, Kane would stay at Spurs if everything moved in the right direction. And then there's a slight twist, I suppose, which is Kane might also stay at Spurs if he just gets control. So can he maximize the crisis to his advantage and say, the only way I'll stay is if you give me control over manager and sporting director and basically make me even more part of the strategic fabric, not just the football fabric of the club. So there's all kinds of variables here. And the other option is, of course, that Daniel Levy's just stubborn and says, you know what, you're not going to sign, but I'm also not going to let you go. I'm just going to run down your contract and take the hit on the value that I could cash in for you, but get another season out of you in which hopefully you'll still be motivated because Kane Spurs through and through to lead the side back towards Champions League football. So I think when people sort of say Manchester United want Kane, he's the top target, that's absolutely true. He's one of the top targets, along with Victor Osimhen and 2 or 3 others. There's, I think, 4 on the list that Manchester United are seriously looking at. And you do that because Kane can be your top target, but if he's not attainable, you got to turn somewhere else. Osimhen can be your top target. Napoli have said they don't want to sell him. So it's not that they're undecided. It's how the window works at this stage. Who's available? Whose value? Who can you get? And then even if you try for that race, another suitor might come in. So, of course, you don't only have one target, especially not this early in the window. But the point I'm making with Kane is that Manchester United have not gone, we're going to get Kane. We think it's possible. We're talking about it. We're moving. Now it's not possible. Panic. Manchester United have always gone, We know Daniel Levy is going to be near impossible to negotiate with. We know we're going to need 100+ million, and we have to work out if we've got that budget. And we also know if we start this and Tottenham make it difficult for us, we may move in another direction. So their position, Spurs' position, hasn't moved. But because headline 1 said they're going to get Kane, and headline 2 says, you know what, it might be quite problematic to get Kane, suddenly everyone feels like there's a twist. There is no twist. Manchester United have been very open. Why have they come in this early? Why are they exploring it? Why are they working out what's possible now? Because they don't want to be messed around. So if it's not going to be a saga and it's viable, because Levy will do business and Kane is prepared to move, then early, before the window opens, they know where they stand, and there's a very strong chance they'll move. And if alternatively, having asked the question, they think this is going to be a joke, we're going to get messed around and we still might not get him, they'll move on to another target. And that has always been the case.
And that makes perfect sense, as you say. I think that's where Man United fans' heads have got to be. There are fears that deal won't happen. Excuse me. But what we're all hoping for is, if it's going to drag on and be a long summer issue, move on to, as you say, Osimhen. Ramos has been linked recently, or move on to other areas that are problematic for us, like the midfield. So we will see. Chelsea have been linked to Harry Kane as well, with Poch coming in, and I think the story surrounding that deal would be almost identical to the one you've just told us surrounding Manchester United, although maybe even harder for Chelsea because of the relationship between the two football clubs and the fans. But one story at Chelsea, because a lot of people are asking about it, so I assume it's very much the same situation, but just with Chelsea. But looking at Chelsea Football Club, a report this morning, they're no closer to agreeing a new deal with Declan Rice, with Liverpool circling for the player. But there's talk of a £80 million price tag on this deal. What do you think is going to happen? Will he sign this new deal? And do you think if he is to leave, Liverpool will pay the asking price that Chelsea are demanding, or will they get him for cheaper than the headlines suggest?
That's a Mount question, right? Because you said Declan Rice.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah, Mason Mount. Sorry, my apologies. Mason Mount. Sorry.
So Mason Mount, and I'm sure we'll talk about Declan Rice as well, is in a position where Chelsea have to come back and pitch to him, either towards the end of the season or at the end of the season. It was supposed to be at the end of the season, but Mount's out now with a pelvic injury, and there is a chance that he won't therefore play for Chelsea again if he leaves the club. He might be fit for the final game of the season against Newcastle United at Stamford Bridge, but we have to wait and see. So Chelsea might move a bit earlier now because Mount's sidelined. He's not having to focus on football. But come the end of the season, for sure, Chelsea are going to try again. And even though earlier on in negotiations, the parties were far apart, Mount is Chelsea through and through. He's been there since the age of 6. So when people have said previously that Chelsea have somehow agreed to sell Mount, simply not true. Chelsea want to keep hold of Mount. Todd Boehly, Behrad Eghbali have told Mount categorically and repeatedly that they want him to stay at the football club. And Chelsea and Mount decided they would pick this up during the summer because they were far apart. And they're far apart in many ways because during the negotiations which dragged on, Chelsea's structure and approach towards renewals changed. So if Mount had been able to sign something when Reece James did, he might have avoided a Champions League decrease and got slightly different terms. But since January, every single Chelsea signature has to buy into the new incentive-driven offer, whereby your wage can go up and down depending on individual or team success, and it includes a Champions League decrease. So Mount, obviously, if he stays at Chelsea, is still going to get a big pay rise, but yet to be agreed between Mount and Chelsea, exact terms that suit all parties. And Chelsea want longer term contracts, they want lower base wages, and Mount feels that the overall reward that he's owed should be higher, but also that the length of contract should be different as well. So there's a few points to discuss, but there is a willingness on all sides to at least sit around the table, which means that Mount actually hasn't made up his mind at this point. And Mauricio Pochettino, if as expected, he comes in the next few days. He won't start until next season, but appointed, signing within the next kind of few days. That's a factor too, because once Mount appreciates the outgoings, which from his perspective, if he stays, means that he'll see more game time if there's not as many people fighting for the same position. And then if the manager also wants to keep him, which is true to my understanding, that Pochettino has said to Chelsea, it's really important we do everything in our power to keep Mount, that might be a factor as well. So Mount staying at Chelsea is all about giving him that pathway, and also the new manager getting the best out of him, because this season, I think he's only scored 3 Premier League goals off the top of my head. Last season, he scored 11 and had basically the best season of his career. And if Mount turns into the player that he was last season rather than this season and plays regularly and is happy with his football and is settled within the squad, then obviously Chelsea have got a fantastic player, which is why they don't want to lose him. So it's not a given that Mason Mount will leave. And then on the flip side, with Liverpool and Arsenal have taken a look, there's an opportunity because of the contractual situation to get Mount at a bargain. And Liverpool in particular have this genuine interest and have been pushing because they know that Chelsea, if Mount simply says no, will sell this summer rather than do that Levy-like move of just keeping hold of the player for an extra year, because Chelsea know that they then need the Mount fee. And that's where there's an opportunity. And right now it's quite hard to judge because Chelsea have waited. So they've not shown their hand. So of course the suitors have an opportunity to pitch now and try and agree something before Chelsea come in. And then whatever they pitch will be used as leverage to go back to Chelsea. So that's all very normal. But we're only really seeing the suitor side at this point. So we have to wait and see how Chelsea almost counter, and then Mount will make up his mind. So I wouldn't prejudge this one. I definitely don't think it's guaranteed that Mount stays at Chelsea, but nothing is agreed with Liverpool or anybody else at this point. And Chelsea will try for sure. And Pochettino may be a factor in that. And then with the 80 million, the suitors are adamant that they don't think it will be that high. And you may note that about 3 weeks ago, it was 70 million. So it keeps going up and up and up and up and up. And I think if you're Liverpool, you're looking more about 50 to 60. It will depend on structure as well. Perhaps the number will be higher, but the structure will be bumped up by add-ons that are either not as attainable or just worth paying if the success comes that triggers those add-ons. So don't only think about the number, think about the structure as well. But, you know, the key point in all of this is Mount hasn't decided. So anybody saying Mount's definitely going, Mount's agreed something, Mount's definitely staying, anybody kind of talking in those terms must be a psychic, because Mason Mount himself has not yet decided what his next move is.
That makes a lot of sense to us. We know there's going to be a lot of activity at Chelsea this summer. Two players that are again linked with them. One, as kind of the player has played down leaving Barca in the last few days, but it's Raphinha. There's a lot of news both from Spain and from the UK that Barca are going to sell him for around 70 million. Chelsea linked, Newcastle linked. You've also got Neymar as well, who is supposedly wanting the Premier League now. But on those two players and their likelihood of joining Chelsea, maybe Newcastle as well, what's your latest understanding on both of them?
Dealing with Barcelona is going to be even harder than last summer. And we know that last summer there was smokes and mirrors, and there's no singular Barcelona player incoming that they want or outgoing that isn't linked to another. Everything is a domino effect. If they move in the direction of Messi and satisfy La Liga, then in likelihood, somebody like Raphinha could well be sold. And similarly, if they miss out on a target, they may keep hold of a player. And you may remember last summer that we had that situation where Barcelona were activating levers and they were saying that they wanted to keep hold of certain players. And then suddenly those players went. Aubameyang's a good example. Xavi said he wanted to keep the player, but there were other moving parts. And with De Jong, it was the other way around. There was a very real chance throughout large parts of the summer that the fee would be needed from De Jong, and then Barcelona made things work. And suddenly De Jong stayed, which was always what the player wanted. And this will be exactly the same with Raphinha. So don't look at a Raphinha transfer as only Raphinha. Look at a Raphinha transfer as the Barcelona circus. And that means that anyone wanting Raphinha has to work out what else Barcelona are doing and how they can stop any possible transfer for Raphinha dragging out and turning into a saga. And unfortunately, perhaps not with the same degree of full-on stubbornness, but unfortunately, Raphinha is a bit like De Jong. He wants to stay at Barcelona. He wants to fight for his place in the team. But once again, Barcelona may need that fee. So there is a real possibility here that we see Raphinha back in the Premier League. And as you say, Newcastle is one possible destination. I feel like that particular link has been overfueled and turned into something that doesn't have as much substance. And the reason for that is because Newcastle effectively want a creative-minded type player, which is why they've looked at Jack Harrison in the past, which is why they're still looking at Maddison. But I'm not aware of anything concrete between Newcastle and Raphinha. I'm not aware of any approach. And the reason why I say that is because when Raphinha was at Leeds, prior to the Barcelona move, prior to Arsenal's interest, prior to Chelsea's offer, Newcastle were asking about Raphinha, and Raphinha wasn't remotely interested. Now, I know Newcastle are in a different position at the moment, but I think we can link a club like Newcastle because of the type of position they're looking for. But I don't think there's really anything in Newcastle Raphinha at this point. And I think if Newcastle move for a creative-minded type player, it will be more the profile of a James Maddison than Raphinha. Because again, I'm not sure that Raphinha has any interest in Newcastle. Chelsea's a bit different because with Chelsea, when Raphinha went to Barcelona, his dream club, there was appeal in the Chelsea offer. But Chelsea's priority is not going to be for a player like Raphinha, not unless they get rid of Ziyech and Pulisic quickly and maybe one more. Chelsea need a traditional striker, a goal scorer. They need a central midfielder, and possibly they need a number one goalkeeper. So Raphinha is not going to be the priority. And the last thing that Chelsea want to do, even though they need goals, is keep buying players in that same versatile position that can switch sides and can add assists and can score goals, because they got hundreds of them. And again, I point out outgoings first. Maybe there's space in the squad, but not for this kind of fee. Chelsea are not going to be able to spend 300-400 million without Champions League football. So if they want a traditional striker, even with money coming in from outgoings, that's going to be their big outlay. If they want a central midfielder, whether it's Caicedo, Lavia, Rice, again, quite a big outlay. Like even pessimistically, that's at least 50 million. You want a goalkeeper, somebody like Onana, David Raya, Jordan Pickford. They're again all at least, and I'm saying pessimistic numbers, 30 million quid. So 30 million quid for a goalkeeper, 50 million quid for a central midfielder, 70 million quid for a traditional number 9. And those are all quite pessimistic numbers for the kind of players Chelsea are being linked with. Once again, that is their summer spend. So Raphinha to Chelsea, Raphinha to Newcastle. Maybe there's admiration from the clubs, but I would be very surprised if he ends up at either.
It's certainly an interesting one. And the Neymar story, like Barca's is with Raphinha's interest. And as you say, they haven't really decided who they want to sell yet. Of course, when you hear stories of it needing to raise money straight away, De Jong to Man United comes up. But Busquets has gone. Kessie hasn't really set the world alight. I can't imagine him leaving personally. It doesn't look like that's on the cards. You get a lot of talk about Raphinha, but the player has come out and said it's unprofessional to suggest I'm leaving. But then you could quote, I don't know, was it Shakespeare that says one doth protest too much or wrote that? It feels a little bit like that maybe. Well, I don't want to leave. You might be forced to. But with Chelsea, the Neymar link is the most interesting one because we all know how good Neymar is as a footballer. But this guy's never played more than 22 league games for Barca in 7 years, for a PSG in 7 years. This would be a huge transfer fee, massive wages for a player that's going to probably miss half your season. I just don't understand why any Premier League club that signs him is going to be in trouble. The only team I think could accommodate him is City. And what I mean by that is, if he's out injured, they'll still be okay. Anybody else that puts their budget into Neymar is going to have a huge hole for half the season when he's out injured. So for me, it just feels crazy. However, we've seen owners in the Premier League before buy players because of their name more so than what they're going to bring to the team. And that could be a real recipe for disaster at Chelsea, in my opinion, especially as they need to get rid of the circus and then they need to get back to football. On back to football, though, with them, I mean, I've spoke to a few journalists in the last few weeks that have put out articles. I've spoke to them and they've kind of suggested that Poch coming in feels pretty much imminent. There's still some details, according to them, to kind of rectify. But as far as you're aware, it's going to be Poch, or could there be a sting in the tail for this for Chelsea fans?
No, there's nothing really alarming about the fact that Pochettino hasn't yet been announced as Chelsea manager. In essence, once you fix upon a candidate and advance those talks, if he's coming in at the beginning of next season, there doesn't have to be a rush. Pochettino is agentless, remember too. So traditionally what he does is he negotiates his backroom staff contracts and his own contract, and that can take a little bit of time. But more importantly, the Chelsea interview process is two-way. So Chelsea are interviewing managers, but because of what's happened at Chelsea in the last year, the managers are interviewing Chelsea. Pochettino wants to be crystal clear on what he's walking into, on what's already been planned. And I think the goalkeeper situation is a good example of that, because any manager, if you ask them one position where they would really want autonomy, it's goalkeeper, because you don't rotate the goalkeeper as much. If someone else says, I'm bringing in this player, it's already too far along the line for you to change, and Kunku's a good example of that, it's a done deal. Pochettino would say, that's not a problem. As long as I've got a manageable squad, I rate the player, I'll use the player, then it's up to the manager for starting 11. But if your recruitment team bring in a number one goalkeeper before you have any control, then in essence, you're either stuck with that or you move in another direction, and then you've got a very unhappy new signing. So Pochettino has to be clear. What have Chelsea locked in? What have they forward planned? What does he have control over? What doesn't he have control over? What's going on with Mason Mount? How much money is there to spend? And then the more broader thing is Chelsea are going to keep moving. Even if there's stability on the football side, they're going to build a multi-club model. So there's a lot of things for Pochettino to get his head around. And when Pochettino spoke to Chelsea before Graham Potter was hired, who was the number one choice at that time, he wasn't overly convinced about joining. And that wasn't only down to Chelsea, but there were parts of it that were, because Todd Boehly was interim sporting director. There was no recruitment team built. The level of spending was not apparent necessarily at that point. I know they'd had a big summer, but it wasn't clear what their January plans were, or their investment in youth, or long-term contracts, or Champions League clauses for decreases or increases if they make it or don't make it. And on top of that, Pochettino had just left PSG, quite a political club, and a difficult dressing room full of egos. So you can understand why, with the window shut, just leaving PSG, Chelsea not having a recruitment team built, he didn't really feel it was the right time. Now he does. And that's why I think a deal will get done. But all parties are taking their time, because Chelsea know this appointment has to be right, and Pochettino has to be crystal clear on what he's walking into, what the dynamic is, what's gone wrong in the past, and how he can change that in the future. And this is normal. And I think that it's not an alarm bell that it hasn't yet been announced. It doesn't matter if it's announced today, tomorrow, next week, next month. As long as he's in for the beginning of the season and it's the right appointment, then the timing of the announcement doesn't matter. And then just quickly on Neymar, I think it's important to say that Neymar himself didn't really want to leave PSG when a lot of the links were apparent last summer. He wanted to fight for his place. But the PSG culture is changing, and they're suddenly investing in youth. They want to buy French talent if they can. Messi's obviously going at the end of the season. And that's no real surprise to me, because when everyone else was saying there was a verbal pact in December, I was reporting there wasn't really any verbal pact. The details hadn't been discussed. And PSG were quite surprised by this notion that there was an agreement in principle done. So I think that there was a lot of games around Messi, but PSG never had anything accepted. And as it turns out, Messi will go at the end of the season. Mbappe could obviously still go at some point as well. And now I think Neymar is of the belief that he would be prepared to go too. And don't be surprised if that's a loan either, which might give somebody a slightly better opportunity financially. And Chelsea and Neymar, again, I'm not so sure, because my understanding is that when Todd Boehly met Nasser Al-Khelaifi after the transfer window shut and before PSG's Champions League game against Bayern, it was an informal meeting. Al-Khelaifi was with the Emir of Qatar. He was with the Bayern delegation, but they did meet, but not to talk about a Neymar transfer at that point. It was more to apologize over the failed Hakim Ziyech loan. So I wouldn't read too much at this point into anything advanced between Neymar and Chelsea. But I do think there's a window of opportunity if it's a loan deal available, depending on the dynamic of the loan, the fee of the loan, and whether or not 100% of the wages have to be paid by the club making the loan. I think there is a possibility that a deal could get done to a Premier League club. But it all depends on Neymar. You know, Neymar put a roadblock on any kind of transfer over the summer. So we have to understand now where the player may go and also who can afford Neymar based on the terms. And if it's a loan deal, it might open up the pool of suitors a little bit wider.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm someone that I'm very much love-hate when it comes to Neymar. I love the ability that he has. I love how he looks on the pitch. But then maybe it's my age. I look at football from a practical standpoint and think, you're going to miss 50% of my games, which he on average has for 7 years on the bounce. It just feels like bad business. But, you know, maybe a new club, new place, new medical team, maybe it changes. We definitely know he goes away in February when him and his sister have their little annual honeymoon holiday together. And, you know, nothing weird, just, you know, great brother and sister relationship. So, you know, you miss him in that period as well. But there we go. Viewers, do us a big favor and hit the like button right now for us. Make sure you're subscribing to the Football Terrace. It's going to be an interesting summer for Arsenal as well, because I've seen one comment in the lives today from an Arsenal fan is, we either go big or go home this summer, is what an Arsenal fan has said here. And I happen to agree. One of the big stories circulating is that Arsenal were tipped to beat Man United and Liverpool and others to depth and Rice. A little bit like Mason Mount, the price keeps rising in the public sphere. What's the latest as far as you're aware around this deal? And is it something that Arsenal fans can expect to happen quickly this summer, or will it be a long saga in your opinion?
Well, I would have said if West Ham had gone down quickly, but now they can be a bit more bullish, and even more so if they get to the Europa Conference League final, win that, and get themselves Europe for next season, which would be a strange kind of year for West Ham, fighting relegation, David Moyes' job under threat for parts of the season. They might suddenly be safe before the final game of the season. Mathematically, they're already safe, in my opinion, in terms of their actual points tally. And then if they get into Europe, they're in a slightly stronger negotiating position. Whereas if you look at Lavia at Southampton, they go down, and if anybody comes in, Lavia is not going to want to play in the Championship. So the suitors will feel like they can suddenly get a deal out of that. With Arsenal, they're there, top priority. Arsenal fans might shudder when they hear of top transfer targets, because it's off the back of Mudryk, who was the top target for January and wanted that move, of course, as well for much of January. But I think that summer's always different, because January is more of a seller's market and the summer transfer window is a buyer's market. And players want stability. Players want to move as early as they can to settle with their new teammates. And as a consequence, I think if you're Rice, you're basically saying to West Ham that I was very respectful last summer of your inflated price tag. And Rice has been excellent this season. And if he helps West Ham win a European trophy and they've stayed up, then I think West Ham owe Rice to not drag out this saga. But again, it will all just depend on whether a deal is on the table that's satisfactory to West Ham. And that's where the games come in. So David Moyes is speaking as if Rice has to go for an Enzo Fernandez-like figure, a British transfer record. But it's not a fair comparison, because Enzo Fernandez wasn't worth what Chelsea paid. The release clause impacted that negotiation. And Chelsea knew that they had to match, or actually pay €1 million more than the release clause to get that deal done. And it was as simple as that. With Rice, it's different, because he's got 1 year left on his contract. West Ham can extend it by a year, but 2 years, if they extend it, is not the same value as with Enzo Fernandez, release clause, January window, Chelsea wanting the player immediately, time running out in the window, and eventually them pushing to the point where they knew that if they were going to be fast and aggressive with time running out, they had to basically match the terms that were being asked, but just with a different payment structure. Rice is a little bit different, I think. So when I've spoken to suitors and even sources within West Ham a month or two ago, and certainly before the Enzo Fernandez deal and that yardstick was out there, the ballpark was much more like 75 to 80 million euros. And that was with a view that West Ham was struggling. They might go down. Rice wanted to leave. Now, as I say, they're safe and they might get European football. Perhaps we can add a little bit to that estimation, but I don't think we're talking 120 million. I think that if the lower ballpark was 75 to 80 million and the higher ballpark is 120 million, then it will settle somewhere in the middle of that, maybe 85, 90. But once again, don't only look at the number, look at the structure. Same with Wesley Fofana to Chelsea from Leicester. It's not about hitting 120 million. It might be about offering up a player and way less cash. It might be about paying 85 million, but with way better payment terms that allow West Ham to use that money and move early in the market. And that's where somebody like Calvin Phillips, even though his situation is unclear, might come into the mix for West Ham. So I think that this isn't really about sky-high numbers, because Declan Rice will leave over the course of the summer. West Ham are resigned to that. It's just about taking the games out of the equation and working out between the parties, once they start directly talking, what the actual number is, not the media number, not the buyer number, not the suitor number, but the actual behind closed doors number. And I think it will be much lower than 120 million. I'd be surprised if it's effectively 12, 13 million above the current British transfer record, as good as Rice is. And then with Arsenal, I think they're confident of agreeing a fee. They think the player is very keen on staying in London. And suddenly between Chelsea and Arsenal, one club's got Champions League football and the other one doesn't. So even though Rice knows Chelsea, because let's not forget he spent the very early part of his career there, and even though that project is highly ambitious, there's far more stability at Arsenal. There's Champions League football at Arsenal, and that's why they still remain confident about pulling that signing off.
You know what's really interesting about what you say there? I'm just taking notes as you're saying it for the timestamps for the people watching back. So people always ask, why are you not always looking at the camera? Because I'm making notes because for the timestamps. But one thing when sometimes fans do this, well, if Enzo went for this, Declan Rice has got to cost that. By that logic, every striker moving forward now is going to cost less than 52 million. Because on paper, that's all Erling Haaland costs because of his buyout clause. So you can't just use a transfer fee as the ultimate barometer, I think, which is really important. I did want to ask about Caicedo as well in this mix, because there's a lot of talk on Sky yesterday that if Arsenal go in for a bid over 70 million, there's a bigger likelihood of that being accepted this summer as opposed to in January. Arsenal may look at him as a secondary option. There are some gooners that are asking to go out and buy both, blow the budget on two, make the midfield imperious. Can you see a world where both are signed, or is this more likely to be one or the other for Arsenal?
I can see a world where Arsenal sign two midfielders. It's just going to come down to players. If Moises Caicedo felt loved by Arsenal and had joined mid-season, then he would have equated that with game time. But if Declan Rice comes in and Caicedo comes in, then there's going to be a question asked by whoever the second one of those two is as to how often they're ultimately going to play. And Arsenal have obviously got lots of other good midfielders at the club as well. So I think from a budgetary point of view and from a dynamic point of view, Rice and Caicedo, it's only my personal opinion, doesn't quite feel right compared to a different kind of midfielder alongside one of those two. But that's ultimately up to Mikel Arteta. And because Arsenal will have Champions League football and the budget that comes with them, I don't think they would necessarily be put off, depending on what the final numbers are. With Caicedo, Arsenal could come back in for sure. And he's always going to be a target because, again, you don't know who you're going to get. You don't know what other suitors are going to come in. So people always misread this and say, but we're going for Rice, so why would we be going for Caicedo? It's not how the window works. You never tell a player, you're our top choice if we can get you. You're our second choice if we can get you. You always have a consistent narrative. You're open and honest with players. And obviously you pitch to them, and you may not give that much away in terms of who your other targets are, but you try and build something on the player side that says, this is our squad. This is how we envisage you. This is the dynamic. This is what the manager thinks of you. So that way, if secretly that player is only your backup, they don't feel unloved. They don't feel made to wait. They don't feel abandoned. And I've said this many times. Chelsea, for example, went to Edson Alvarez last days of the window in the summer, and the player wanted the move. So he didn't show up for training on the last day, and Ajax said, no, we're not selling. And the player said, okay. And Todd Boehly said, we'll be back. We really want you. And then Chelsea went on to other targets like Enzo Fernandez, and they never came back. And that leaves the agent, the player, and potentially the selling club thinking, we feel a bit misled. And part of that is just football. But what Arsenal, Manchester City, and Liverpool do really, really well is they have that consistent narrative. They don't underpromise, they don't overpromise, and they're as honest as they can, with obviously the respect of saying, we're not going to show you a list of where you rank and what we're trying to do. There's always a game. But this is why you hear Rice, Caicedo, Lavia, and others, because in essence, you can't just plan for one. And I said that earlier with Manchester United. So Rice and Caicedo, again, only my personal opinion. Mikel Arteta and Edu may disagree. Doesn't feel like the right two midfielders to move for, given what Arsenal have already got. But we'll wait and see. But Caicedo's possibility to Arsenal, of course. Rice is a top priority, and Lavia is another one to keep an eye out on. And remember, Arsenal have explored Mount. Liverpool are the ones that have really pushed on that. But Mount's somebody, again, that might be available in the market too, and is a different kind of midfielder to Declan Rice. But with Caicedo, I think moving parts again, because Alexis McAllister's the one really pushing and trying for the early move. And then if Brighton make European football, they're not going to want an exodus, and they only sell on their terms. And that doesn't mean Caicedo won't be sold, but if McAllister goes early, we have to wait and see what Brighton do, because they're going to want a replacement. And that might either delay a Caicedo move later into the window, or it might make Brighton a little bit more bullish. And nothing's changed with Caicedo in the sense that just because he signed a new deal, he still obviously appreciates that big clubs want him, and Brighton know that. But they're not just going to sell McAllister day one of the window, sell Caicedo day one of the window, sell Rob Sanchez, even though he's kind of out of the starting 11 at the moment, on day one of the window, and then be like, yikes, we've got European football, we need a bigger squad, and now we've lost two of our best players. They're the smartest club probably in the Premier League in terms of how they handle recruitment. So if one or the other of McAllister, Caicedo goes early, clubs looking for that other player that's still at Brighton, whichever one it is, might have to be a little bit more patient. And the other thing is that because there's so many midfielders available in the market, it isn't a guarantee what the fee might be for Caicedo. Everyone just presumes that because he was 70 million and it was rejected in January, that now with a new deal signed, it has to be 80 million, 90 million. And yeah, that might be the case. But imagine if Declan Rice goes for 80 million, then is Caicedo 80 million? And also, throughout the process of what Arsenal considered to be an inflated offer in January for Caicedo of 70 million, Caicedo's new agents were saying, how can he be more than the base fee for Tchouaméni? And that was more like 60 million off the top of my head. So the yardstick for Caicedo is not only based on January and what Arsenal offered. And this is where Chelsea were quite smart, because Chelsea bid 15 odd million less than Arsenal and then walked away. And they did so because if it's Chelsea that returns to the table for Caicedo, they can say, well, we were only in the 50s as our base fee, and now we want to go up to 60 or 65, and that's still way more than we offered you in January. Take it or leave it. And if Arsenal are not in the race, then Brighton may say, yikes, we actually think that's quite a good offer now because the player's less in demand. He wants to leave. Chelsea have upped their offer from January. So don't take 70 rejected as gospel, even with a new contract, that Caicedo has to be more. He might be more, but it's not guaranteed. And this is the finesse of the market. It's the timing when you bid. It's the demand. There's all kinds of moving factors in this. So again, when Arsenal are looking at midfield, they have to understand who's available at value and then the chemistry of their team. And I think that Edu and Mikel Arteta will be, in my opinion, quite aggressive in the market. And with Champions League football, they can be. But it isn't only about these names as independent entities and the values that people think they're available for. It's also about the fit and chemistry within the team.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. It really does. Now, I know you've got a hard stop now because you've got another a show to rush off to. But Ben, I want to say thank you very much for coming on, mate, and having your say. I'm going to finish things off with the viewers and do some of their super chats and stuff. But thank you for the insight. And I'm sure as the summer's building up, we'll be having you on more and more moving forward, my friend.
Look forward to it, everyone, and I'm glad to see the jumper got mostly 7s and 8s.
Yeah.
I think it was out of 10, not 100.
They always get rated highly, Ben. Top man. We'll speak again soon, brother.
All the best. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. Viewers, I'm going to stay with you for a little while. Make sure like buttons have been hit and that you smash the like button as well. Super chat came in from Brandon that says, we need more than just Rice and or Caicedo. We need a goal-scoring number 9, a centre-back, a midfielder, and a winger. Look, I agree Arsenal need to improve on multiple areas. That's why I don't personally think you'll get Caicedo and Rice, just because of the budget. That eats up the best part of £200 million based on what things look. However, if you listen to what Ben said and you end up in a situation where you get Rice for 80, 90 million, that's sort of 30 million less than what the media is saying. You end up in a situation where you get Caicedo for 65 million. Suddenly you're looking at 150 as opposed to nearly 200. So maybe it's plausible. Also depends on who you sell. Maybe Xhaka goes and you get a decent amount of money for him. Maybe you're able to offer them both first-team football because they're seen as better longer-term alternatives to Xhaka and Partey that have done so well this year as well. So I think there's multiple options here for Arsenal, but you are right. They need more up front as well. They are looking at Raphinha. That is it. It didn't get mentioned today, but they're linked to him. So maybe it won't be a number 9 to get the goals. Maybe there's a belief that Martinelli and Saka and Raphinha between them can increase their outputs and you kind of share that burden. So there's more than one way to skin a cat. But I think as well, another centre-back may be key for you. Although I do think Kiwior looks very, very talented indeed. Terry UC Potts is just another manager sacked at Chelsea because of ruthless nature if he doesn't hit the ground running or win trophies, which is expected. I think then this is the thing with the conversation around ruthless nature. There should be a ruthless nature at clubs, but you have to contextualize that. So should he be expected to win the Premier League year one? From where Chelsea are now, I think that would be an abnormal achievement. Therefore, the expectation is ridiculous. Should he be expected next year to push you nearer towards top 4? Should you be more competitive in the cup competitions? Yes. Could there be an expectation to win one? Yes. But let's just say there's an expectation to win the Carabao Cup. But in round 3, you're drawn away to City and you win. And then in round 4, you're drawn away to Liverpool at Anfield and you go out. Yes, you didn't win the trophy, but you had maybe the 2 hardest back-to-back draws you could get. However, you get a run where you're playing League One and Championship teams. The expectation on you winning it is much higher. So you have to contextualize what's going on. And I think sometimes as football fans, we don't do that. It's sort of, we have a standard in our mind and we apply that standard and logic to every single scenario. And you can't. Like when me and Lee Gunner argue. And he states that if you don't win the league, you should be sacked. But you have to deep that. You're sacking 19 managers per season. You're sacking 19 managers per season every year. You never let anybody build. It means you'd have squads that are built in the image of 19 different managers and it'd be recycled every year. Clubs would go bankrupt because they'd be paying. You'd literally, over the period of 5 years, you'd have 25 years worth of contracts of managers to pay because most managers sign a 5-year deal. So in 5 years, you've sacked 5 managers. It leaves you with 20 years remaining of salaries for managers that are not there. You can never do this. That's why you can't have a one-size-fits-all magic glove approach. Magic gloves, they fit everybody, right? One size fits all. You can't do that. There has to be nuance. There has to be context. There just has to be. Who do you think could be competition for Saka? I'd like an experienced right winger, but I'm not sure if you can go for at a reasonable price. But I think Raphinha would be a great person to challenge Saka. I think up until this season, a lot of people would have said he's better than Saka. Saka's gone up another level this year, outputs, goals, big performances. But you need to do it. And I think that Arsenal were in the same position as Man United squad-wise. You should be looking to what I call top fill. So looking for first-team players or individuals that can push Saka out of the team, can push Partey out of the team, can push Saliba out of the team. You should never be too attached to a player. If your team gets better, fuck it. Whoever doesn't get developed, it's on them. So almost survival of the fittest in many ways. What will Barca do? What I need to know what you mean by that, Debbie. Do in terms of what? You need to contextualize that for me. I don't know what you mean, my lovely. It will never happen, but Harry Kane would be the perfect fit for this Arsenal team. He scores goals and creates. He's a major level above Jesus. Yeah, you're right. That's never happening. In my opinion, that's never, ever gonna happen. Ever. I don't even think he would do a Sol Campbell and join on a free. I don't think he would do that. There is a kind of, what's the word for it? Is it sadistic? Is that the word? Sadistic. Is that a word? Sadistic. Driving pleasure from inflicting pain, suffering, and humiliation. Like I mean, I don't mean it in a vicious way, but there's this little slither in me that would almost like to see the fallout of that happening. Be like, oh wow, this will be an interesting one. You know? But I don't see it happening. But yeah, there's a sadistic part of me that's like, yeah, I'd love to see the fallout, the media headlines. I'd love to see Jamie O'Hara's face on TalkSport. It would be brilliant. I do think there's an outside chance that Chelsea get him. A very small outside chance. I just think there could be if the right money's offered. We know that's what Levy and Enoch care about the most is profiteering from Tottenham. They're not running the club to become the very best football club in the world. I don't think that they would almost come out with some PR spin around, yes, it's one of our fierce rivals, but we're going to use the money to make us even better. So look at it from the angle that our rivals are funding our future. They would spin it in that way, but essentially they wouldn't improve their team or squad considerably enough to earn trophies. So therefore it wouldn't matter. But I can see a world where that maybe happens. MUFC Realist says, smash the like button. Big up, brother. Take care. Work-life balance, health. Big regard, Mick Ruby. Thank you, bro. I appreciate it. This work-life balance is really key. And it's hard with what I do for a job because we're a match reaction channel by definition. So I work a lot of evenings. I work a lot of weekends. But you've got to have your downtime. You've got to have your downtime. You've got to have your... And I'm doing a little bit of downtime Monday. I'm actually going to go out and look for a new car because I've got a little announcement for you. Remember the original Car Cam channel? Before any other YouTuber was making videos in their car, before James Corden started doing carpool karaoke, there was a little man called Terry Flewers who used to do podcasts in his car. Car Cam is returning to the football terrace. Remember that. It's on its way back. Some people think, oh my God, you've stolen this person's idea. You stole that person's idea. No, we did it first. That's actually how the channel started 7-8 years ago. Unpopular theory, Kulusevski to Arsenal for 35 mil. Now, that's something Spurs have got to guard against. They have to guard against this Tottenham. Genuinely. They could be in big trouble if they let him go because this player, look, he hasn't had a great season. But I believe that's because the team has downturned at the same time. If he joins, oh my God, I can't even say it out loud. If he joins Arsenal, carnage. But there seems to be some problems with that deal right now, so it could happen. Terry, can you explain what the correct appointment means without using hindsight? Well, the correct appointment is an opinion before you know the outcome. And people are allowed, Twisted Bubba, to have opinions on things. So you may believe, based on what's going on at a particular football club, that manager A is the right fit to take you forward, is a perfect fit to manage the squad, the profile of player, the situation your club is in. So saying it's a perfect fit or correct appointment is an opinion, and people are entitled to an opinion. If we turn around now and say no opinions before the fact can be given on football, it means 95% of all football conversation ends, and all we can do is react to things. But what's fun about reactions is comparing it to what people said prior. That's the fun part. So yeah, that's essentially what it means to me personally. Terry doing car cams in his Bugatti. Now it's not gonna be. I ain't got that kind of money, bro. I wish I had enough money. I wish I had enough money for a Bugatti. I don't think I'd ever spend like £250,000 on a car. But then maybe if I had 100, 200 million in the bank, I would. I suppose it's comparative, isn't it? You know, money is there's a spectrum when it comes to money. Terry was posting streams on the tube stations and walking to and from work. Yeah, bro, man. Some of that, and that only changed because of lockdown. And then the growth you gave me in lockdown meant I could do this full time. It's like literally, I sometimes feel like if lockdown didn't happen, I wouldn't be doing this day to day like I am now. Terry, I think there's a validity in both approaches when it comes to bringing success to a club. Rotating managers is fine. Same with long-term projects. There just has to be a method to the madness. The thing is, though, rotating managers is still part of a long-term project. So don't look at the overall European success now because money has changed the landscape of European football. But Ajax are not going to change direction, although they may sack their most recent manager that's failed. They've had a terrible season by their standards, but they're not going to change their long-term project. Bayern Munich, if their manager fails, they don't change their long-term project. Real Madrid, if a manager fails, their project stays the same. We have this habit in England because we used to have managers like Fergie, like Clough, like Paisley that manage the club. We don't have managers anymore. We have head coaches that train the team and pick the team. They do have an input and say in transfers and the direction of the club. But the club having a long-term plan and rotating managers is still a long-term plan. The plan behind the managers is more important to a degree than the managers. If the foundation is weak, the house is going to fall down no matter how good the bricks are, how good your roofing is, how good the windows are, doesn't matter how good the furniture looks, how well the walls are plastered. If the foundations crumble, everything falls down. So there always has to be a long-term plan. Whether you rotate managers or not, there's no plan behind the scenes. Sacking managers is futile. It's not going to improve you. How do we know this? Look at Manchester United as a prime example. No club that's run well with a good plan that spends money fails in the way Man United have, in the way Chelsea have in recent times. It doesn't happen ever. This comment here says no, I've already done that one there. Actually, I've already done all the super chats. Super chats are all done. So I thought I missed a super chat. I didn't. Or did I do Debbie's? Did I do Debbie's? No, here it is. Sorry. Will Man United sack Ten Hag if a manager is available? Will Barca keep their players? Would Man United get Emi Martinez? I like Emi Martinez. I don't think he's necessarily the best option out there. I look at Onana. I look at Magic Mike. I look at Costa. I prefer them. But Emi Martinez could be an option for Man United. Will we sack Ten Hag if a better manager is available? I think if the manager's lost the dressing room or we're regressing, then it's definitely an option. If we're progressing, you stay with what you've got because the new manager may be better on paper, but may take you back further. So I would rather continue with the manager if we're progressing at the right velocity and in the right direction. And will Barca keep their players? Not all of them. They need to sell. So they will sell some, but they will keep their cards close to their chest. Because what you don't want to do is state that we're going to sell these 3 or 4 players. So you say they name 4 players they're willing to get rid of to raise the money. You lower the price of those players because clubs know you're desperate. So they're going to say nobody's for sale, even though in reality they have to sell people. Go retro, buy a DeLorean. Do you know what? If I was super rich, I would be someone that I would go out and look, I'd buy supercars maybe. But what I would do is I would go out and buy like cars from famous TV shows and films. Like I would have a DeLorean, but done up like Back to the Future. I'd probably buy the Mystery Machine from Scooby-Doo. I'd probably buy a kind of replica of the Robin Reliant from Only Fools and Horses. I'd probably buy a Batmobile as well, to be fair. If I was dumb rich, and you could never spend all that money. Firstly, I'd give a lot away to people because what I would actually do, I always think one of my dreams is winning the Euro Millions. And what I would do, and my biggest kind of dream of it, would be to sit all my favorite people in the world, my family, my best friends, people that have done even some people they don't even know this is in my head that did me really well when I was younger. There was a family that took me in Manchester, let me live there really, really cheaply while I was training with Team GB. I would get all those people around a room and give out money to them just as a thank you. Mainly is one, to make their lives better, hopefully. The second reason is I wouldn't want to have all that money and suddenly start chilling with new people. I'm not about that. I want to chill with my people, but so we all can chill. That's what I'd do. Anyway, we digress massively, but there we go. That's what it does. I remember the Embankment. Yeah, the Embankment. I miss being on the Embankment. I miss being in London, to be fair. I do miss my old job. As much as I love what I do now and I love you people that watch, I do miss my old job. I do miss being in banking. I love the industry. I love the social side of it. It was great. But look, we move on. We do new things. And the great thing about this job is I'm so close to my kids every day. There's not 4 or 5 hours of commuting. It's nice. I love it. I love it. But there we go. Buy things that hold value or increase value. That's what you're saying, Terry. To a degree, properties and land and things like that. But at the same time, you can't take it with you. You've got to spend it. And spending the money is good for the economy and the people. Do you know what I'm saying? So there we go. Listen, everyone who's tuned in today, thank you. Massive appreciation from me. Hit the like and the share button. Remember, the Top 6 show live tonight at 6 p.m. So the link's ready now. So go now, set a bookmark, go and hit the like button. Make sure you're here at 6 p.m. Great panel for you tonight. With Flawless is on the show. Jerry James is on. I forget everybody. Gal's back with us tonight and a few others. So we'll see you all later today. Take care. Goodbye. God bless. And I'll speak.